And like, I'm realizing like how much of academia is like unpaid work. Being on a board of a journal is unpaid. So when you pay to have your journal piece published, I don't who is getting that money since nobody is paid. Like, there's no prime fandom space that's perfect, and Twitter is probably, in my opinion, one of the most flawed because of the fact that it's a very like it's based on reactionary like engagement and limited characters. So like you have to say the snappiest thing to get the most reaction to have the biggest influence, and that's not great and like not conducive in fan spaces, which are spaces of like dialectic and discourses. Like they're supposed to talk things like I don't get upset about the arguing or the not agreeing on things. I don't even get upset about the little like insular like groups within. I think the problem is like there's no barrier, there's very little filter. It's very hard to like engage thoughtfully on Twitter. Have I explained solo stands to you?
Refresh my memory.
Okay, so solo stands are like if you stand a group, they only are interested in the one member barring the rest of the group. Like they don't act, and like their whole mission is to like get that one separated from the group. So they create these like narratives of like mistreatment, or like they don't want them to stiflement. Like that's the whole abuse, because it's this whole narrative that they create that like mine is special, they're being mistreated, that's why they're part of the group, otherwise they would be special by themselves, and everybody can see that. And because like the members themselves are talking about songs that they participated on, solo stands are rife because it's like, oh, this is their song, not BTS's song, though it's BTS's song. So, long story shorter is Jimin and J-Hope helped to produce this song called Dis-Ease. It's lit.
That song, I've been listening to it, yeah.
So good. A lot of the bridge is was composed by Jimin in like 3 to 4 minutes. Literally, talent, so many. And so he sang the bridge, but then J-Hope solo stands got mad at everybody, but Jimin included, because they're like, he's stealing his song, da 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 da. And so I made a tweet, an offhand tweet, didn't expect anyone to see it, in which I was like, imagine watching these clips and then being mad, like feeling a real unpleasant emotion because of a 15 to 20 second clip makes absolutely no sense to me. 650 something likes. And I was like, oh, cool. And then today, J-Hope did his part of Disease and sang his little part, and I was like, all this hooting and hollering yesterday just for both of them to both be on the song because they both worked on it, and now we're up to like 150 likes, and I'm like, what is going on? Hello, Twitter people, leave me alone. So I'm very famous this week. I'm an influencer.
What a wonderful, it's like a birthday alignment, and there's just like goodness, there's abundance going on. When you talk about solo stands, there's such a divisiveness to it that I wonder, how is that addressed by everyone? Like,
it's weekly, not even daily discourses. Like a big part of my paper is trying to write on fandom identity, because I've seen like solo stands or people who are like, when I was into One Direction or even the Jonas Brothers, you were like a Nick girl, a Joe girl, a Harry girl, a Niall girl, whatever. And like, it was like a thing. It wasn't really that big of an issue. Like, they seemed to like blend in and out of the group. If you were just like solely dedicated to one member, it was like not this big of a deal. And then I get to K-pop, and like akgays is what they're called in Korean. And it's a problem because they're so vicious. The thing about it is like you go to speak out on it, and I think they like silence you because they swarm you. And like I think it comes from a place of projection, because like in fandom there are like internally in BT, like you fight with other fandoms, but that's different. But internally, like a lot of our internal strife comes from like 3 or 4 main groups, and so that would be like solo stands, fans that are called manties. So they're like, it's like, it stands for manager anti. So they're fans who think they know better and want to overmanage the group. And then like shippers, fan creator kind of people. Those are like the main vexes internally that like armies have. And all of it comes from like this weird place of like thinking you know more than other fans, you know more than the boys, you know more than their company, and like projecting that as like truth and fact on the timeline. And it all feeds into this like weird victimization where it's like, oh, I really love them, and because I really love them, I want them to be solo. Because I really love them, I want to manage them better in such and such ways. Because I love them better, I want these two people to be out, and because they're in love. Like, that's literally where they all stem from.
It's parasocial on steroids.
Yes. Oh my God.
Because I mean, it's but is it centering the fan or the viewer? Like, is the intent some twisted form of agency? Or I mean, what, like?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, because it's so, a lot of it is like over analytical to the point of like delusion. Honestly, that's the only way to say. I think the thing that would be like most beneficial, and is like a receptiveness to learn. Because again, I think a lot of for younger people, it's this, I understand the internet, so there's no way that like you could dupe me or like manipulate me on here, or like I can find everything I need to know and I know what I need to know, or the idea that people just don't lie on the internet. And then for older people, it's just that like that whole thing that like once you're past a certain age, like your mindsets are set on things. And I think like that also is a thing where you like think you know how the world works and no one can tell you otherwise, even if it's very clear. So like just a willingness to like go into spaces and like know that you don't know anything. I feel like the reason why I'm in fandom studies is because I got into K-pop and I was just like, I've been a fan before, but this is like completely different. And like, even though I'd been a fan some 20 odd years, I've only been in Army for 2, and I feel like I've learned so much about how fandom works and how it can look and like how it differs and how it interacts. And like, you just have to be willing to do that. But I know a lot of people aren't. You want to jump in and be like, I have all the knowledge and that's enough.
I mean, what you're pointing to has a very direct parallel in my mind to academia and to being a scholar. But, you know, I've talked to other people who are current students too, and they like you in the past, have expressed, and how I've experienced as well. Like there's the person in your class, there's your schoolmate that's just gonna talk, and never ask any questions. And they appear as if they think they know everything. But then there are other folk who want to ask questions, and you're pointing to entering the space and the willingness that I think speaks not only to fandom or not only to media studies, it speaks to learning, and it speaks to being in the world. Like, that's a big thing that's coming up often in my mind, is like, who's willing to potentially not get it right, to make mistakes, to ask questions, and to get somewhere they didn't anticipate they were going to go, because that's, I think, frightening for some people. I'm mentally unpacking as I'm talking to you, like the position you are in as a scholar and a fan, because I too am that way. Do you think folks realize that their solo stan animus is harming others?
Yes, because I think there's like different levels of intensity with solo stans. There's a little bit of racism in it, because it's a lot of times like white people towards this Asian group of men, like in this controlling aspect. There's a lot of like fetishization when it comes to like shipping and like fan creator content. Manti, same thing. It's like the kind of like racism and like being like, I, a Westerner, know more about this than like people who've been doing this for like a decade or more now. The level of like prominence for these like outlier groups is growing, because as like the 1% rule goes, like, so as the fandom grows, that 1% will get bigger, just because like that's how numbers work. And so they get bigger, they get louder, and we have like more fighting. It's never fun because there's no like real way to like eradicate them and defeat them, especially like, again, as the fandom gets bigger, it's just like a much more overwhelming number to deal with. And then I also think it's just like media literacy is not taught the way I think effectively, I think, because you have a lot of young, impressionable people on the internet. And the thing about being young and impressionable is you don't think you're young and impressionable. Like me at 14, 15, 16, I thought I knew everything. And now I look back 10 years ago and I'm like, you knew nothing. And like that same thing happens like on the internet where like fan spaces are predominantly young people, 18, no, like younger than that. They like fandom thinks it skews like 13 to 20. And then you'll find older adults like me and like we're shamed for being old in these spaces. But like that's a group of people who like just barely got access to the internet, don't have media literacy, don't have the analytical or like worldly context to like understand like the things that you do or say are not in a vacuum, and like don't understand how projection works. And I think like that's, and then they get around like-minded people, and that doesn't sound that bad until you're basically a 16-year-old saying that this person doesn't have control over their life, and you have 1,000 followers or 10,000 followers, blah, 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 blah. And like that reach only keeps growing the more people follow you, which is not something I think, like, and it's so quick to do that. The misinformation travels so quickly, which is also another, I think, battle that you fight in fandom is just like people just lie. People just lie, and other people don't know any better. They circulate that, and then you have to not only put out the truth, but combat this lie, and there's no way to take that lie down or stop the influence of all the thousands of people who just saw this. And then you're also getting swarmed because you spoke out against it. Like, it's just a mess.
It's a glorious mess. I mean, it reflects so much. Like, I'm thinking of the parallels between what you're describing and like the larger sort of landscape that we're in, because you're talking about truth and lies, and it's kind of like many will say we're in a post-truth era. Like, it doesn't really matter if it's true or not, or if it's real or not. It's the narrative that gets disseminated and how that reaches people. But that sort of, it's so messy. It's beyond messy. It's problematic because you could just make up whatever, and then that becomes part of the reality that's being believed, you know?
And again, because this is K-pop and things get translated, very messy, very messy. That happens very frequently now, where it's like, oh, this was said, and it's like, okay, you took a screenshot of another language out of complete context and like with disregard for like how the language works. And so then it's like, we have to get someone who accurately translated, disseminated this way, talk about how you're wrong, get your post taken down. Like, it's a lot. The idea that like Stan Twitter Western is supposed to be the exact as Stan Twitter for like Asian bands is, I think, where a problem comes in, because again, as much as we talk about like globalization, transnationalism, transculturalism, it's very English based. Like, I have lots of like internet friends who are from different countries. I feel like every week I find out that somebody not only is Malaysian or Burmese or Indonesian, but they like live there and like speak whole other languages and like have whole different like cultural ties. And again, a lot of those people that I follow, thankfully, are Asian, and like to see how they react to stuff that goes on in K-pop versus more Western white fans is so different, versus black fans. Like, all of those things are like very different. They operate on like different other points of Twitter, and I feel like a lot of times, like especially the idea that like fandom and fandom studies should not be monolithic. I think like you have to understand every fandom has its individual priorities that come from A, the content that they stan, and B, who are the like pillar people in those fandom communities. And I think for like a lot of stan Twitter, is, because it's Western, is Black people. And so that comes with this kind of like progressive bent when you also have on Black Twitter is very big on Black Lives Matter. That was literally the organization platform. And so it's like, okay, this is a woke or progressive space different from HP Alliance because of the people who make up this community and what their priorities are. And then you have to also be like, because of those priorities, they project those priorities onto their object and onto their fandom space and say that this is the way that they should operate. And that not all of those spaces, even if they're made up of like the same people, will like operate the same way. So that's why you have fan wars of like one Black K-pop fans groups versus like Black armies, because like that is not a monolithic interpretation of like how this should work. And I think for me, it's like, okay, I want to debunk the idea, because people keep saying this, even in my studies and even online, is like people are only here for the fandom experience outside of like whatever thing you're fanning over. And I'm like, that does not exist, because the thing that you fan over is the reason why your fandom experience looks a specific way. Because I'm like, I guess like, yeah, if you're a fan of music, you would just like stream music, but like most people do that, but you wouldn't say they're having a fandom experience. So like, and I was like, in my fandom experience in the Jonas Brothers, One Direction, Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, DC versus freaking BTS are all different because of like their priorities of each group, who the pillars of each group are, and like what they have decided to focus upon. Like people be like, oh, K-pop stans are all like this, and I'm like, no, they're not. No, they're not, because you'll have like boy group stans, they can prioritize different things than girl group stans, and then within boy groups, how one group decides to prioritize one fandom practice versus another is a point of contention, because again, it says what type of values each fandom upholds is important. And I don't understand like how one, you think you can jump into this, you can enter this space and think it's going to be monolithic as a fan, because I feel like you're in for a rude awakening. And that's not even counting the fact that, again, K-pop is from Korea with its own individual fan, like, culture outside of before it became, like, globalized.
It's a whole, like, 10 more layers of media literacy, of an invitation to media literacy if people wanted to engage in that regard. I mean, I'm wondering, because you mentioned media literacy, like what are some of the other examples apart from or different from the tweet that you had sent that got 650 likes? Like, do you consider that an exercise in pointing towards media literacy, and what other ways has it come up? Are people engaging in that way?
I think there is media literacy in trying to like understand how other people think or why they do what they do. But sometimes their actions just seem so nonsensical or so hyperbolic that you're just like, what? Because I feel like that's a lot of the problem, is like you're trying to rationalize with people who know they're not being rational and they have no intentions of. And like you're going to them in good faith when that is just not that's not going to get you anywhere. The thing that's like the most annoying about what I do is that like I'm a fan, so like I have my own personal ties to like what gets said and done. But as an academic, I don't get to just like write off people that I don't like or disagree with. And as a fan, that's the worst part, because when you say something stupid or just like divisive or anything like that, like I have to like task myself to like go to, like, this is the thing I do. I like go to your page. I see what other stuff you said. I see like what people, like I see who you interact with and like what they say. And like, I'm not very happy by the time I leave those places, but it does give me like a better understanding. Like I understand a little bit how Twitter's algorithm works. So like the algorithm cannot discern good versus bad engagement. It only knows engagement. So even if I'm quoting a tweet to say that it's wrong, it's engaging it and giving it a wider reach. Now it's to all the people that follow me, you know, all 200 of them. And so then it's just like me being like, in reference to, like, yeah, my tweet was like, in reference to the drama that we are all aware is going on, these are my opinions. And like, I know there are a lot of people who take screenshots so that the information can be seen without you having to like click and engage on the page. Group chats is another way that I've heard people like trying to communicate that. So you send it in the group chat and you all, however many people are in there, go do the thing. I do talk about a lot of things in my DMs with my friends that are armies versus like on my timeline, because it just also feels safer. And again, from a researcher's point of view, like as much as my Twitter page is like a fanish space, I try to like, one, keep it positive, and like two, not get it taken down by engaging with people. Because like that's the thing, I've never been I've never had like separate fan pages for things. Like it's always just been my regular page because that's just like how I operate as a person. Like me as a fan is me. But there are a lot of people who like have that separation, and I think that also helps in creating like separate spaces for you and like how you want to engage with things and like how you want to tackle things that don't work.
Do you find that when you discuss this within academic circles, that folks are able to grasp that it's not monolithic?
I think when I talk to other fans of color, yes. But I also think, when I talk to Black fans, yes. But I feel like there is a resistance because then like the idea of being like, oh, fandom critical is like not always a great thing. And like, so it's like fandom is a transformative place. It's a progressive space. It's a happy escapist place. And like, yes, but no, because fandom is made up of people and they bring all their with them when they get up here. So you can't escape or transform or progress past like where people are when they get here, because that's who they are. And I don't think it tarnishes the fun of fandom to acknowledge in your fandom or in fandom at large are these like tensions and types of groups of people.
I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about your experience at CGU looking at this world. You don't have to. But.
No, I think it's like important. I think the thing that's the most frustrating for me is part of the academic process as a whole. Okay, journals are like people in your field. The person who reads your paper is a person in your field closely related to what you have submitted, hopefully, most likely. And so it's like, okay. And then there's that whole thing about like fill the gap, be niche. And so that says to my brain, who I'm talking to knows what I'm talking about. Versus writing a paper in grad school is the opposite, where you have to always give this kind of like overview of what you're talking about, especially in like more niche things like what I study, where I'm like, fandom studies was this. It was popularized in the 90s by Henry Jenkins and these people. And now I'm talking about K-pop, which of the Hallyu wave started in BTS is that an army and like, so like half my paper is that before I can even get to like what I'm trying to say. And I think that's one, because like I study fan studies, which is like not super well known. I mean, like if I say what I study, it's very obvious versus like if I say I study cultural studies and people are like, what's that? But I think the problem comes from like trying to find your own voice in a place that's not prepared for you to speak. So I think like if we're talking about anything to do kind of with like Black people, there's enough Africana studies and knowledge on African and African diaspora and Africana and Black American studies that like if you submitted a paper on that, it would be understood. And you could kind of, I think, go deeper or talk about things in class without having to give so much preface. And like, I think that's like a thing that I'm trying to work on is like, as we were sitting here, I explain so much because I'm just like so used to like coming from an area where like people don't know what the heck I'm talking about. And I also have never been a fan of traditional academia, the ivory tower, gatekeeping, jargon, crap. Not my favorite thing, because I want first of all, I want for someone to look for my paper and it to be helpful for them, because the whole paper I'm writing is a paper that doesn't exist and frustrates the crap out of me that it's not there. And then two, I think fandom should understand more of its world. So I don't think it should be a purely academic thing to talk about media literacy, globalization, affective theory, because I'm like, all these things work and surround you and you talk about them already. I would love you to know that is acknowledged. And those are just like very different places to straddle and very difficult places to get a rein on, because there's so much like chagrin around like, oh, like the internet and how it's used. And I'm like, are you there? Do you know it's like, do you personally know its effects? Do you know like how people around you use the internet? Because like, as much like the class is going to be on like what is cultural studies, because of course it is, and we're going to talk about the internet, and everybody's going to be like, the internet and Big Brother and the Panopticon and Foucault. And I'm going to be like, great, all of that is very important. It matters so much. But I'm like, do you use the thing? Yeah. Do you know how people engage with the algorithm? Because the algorithm is not this big secret that like laymen don't know. They know it. They finesse it. They engage with it all the time. And I think that that's so crazy that we do, because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was like not the case. And I'm like, how can you have a digital studies class when so many of you don't use the digital that you're studying?
Yeah. And I think part of that is the residue of academia looking to the past all the time, where it's like, because I know for me, I was looking at a TV show for my dissertation that was made, less than 10 years ago. And I could feel that pushback of like, no, go back. Like if you're not looking at something from 1920, what are you doing? And it's like, well, but in the present moment, especially because things are moving so fast, like why not look at this and try to not necessarily get ahead of it, but get a sense of what is going on in order to move with it. As scholars, as academics, as human beings. Sorry, I'm getting preachy, but like it just doesn't make sense to me to only look.
I think for fandom, it's more frustrating for me because like I'm in an environment that does not understand my context, where I'm like, okay, I'm looking at Twitter as a critical site for my research subjects. And the thing that's like so frustrating is like having to like explain to everyone just like how the internet works because I'm like, I was like, okay, the people that I engage, the subjects that I engage with are digital natives on Twitter. I'm using words, okay? Critical sites, natives. We know what those are. And I'm like, okay, come with me on this journey as I try to use terms that you use all the time, but they don't work because the context of which I'm trying to do is not from the 1920s or the 60s. And I'm like, it's not as helpful for me. So it's like the people that I'm supposed to reference and supposed to know don't feel relevant to what I'm doing because they could have never accounted for Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason why I love media studies so much is because I will tell anyone who will listen that TV raised me. And like so many, and like, but even as like a kid watching television, I was questioning it. TV like gave me a framework, but that framework that television paints is not entirely like correct or like without its own messaging. So then you get like people who think, oh, like it's romanticized. It should be like the movies, or it's like hyper whatever, because it's like, because that's how television works. And so I was like, wow. And I was affected on like, not just like what was on screen, but like how it was affecting me, because like I do live in the real world. So like if I'm going to take the romanticization or the narratives from television and transplant that on my real life, how does that work? How doesn't that work? What does that say about my real life or our real lives that we can do such a thing? And what does that say about TV? That so much of it does or doesn't work. And then fandom studies was just like, okay, now do this in groups.
I too grew up on television, much to the frustration of my mother specifically. And I think finally, at this point, with the diploma,
hey,
it arrived. I think I started out as a passive television consumer, but then it was high school that it sort of clicked something. I went to a progressive private high school in Boston, and we were able to make announcements after lunch. Like we all had lunch together, all 120 of us, tiny school. But the sort of democratization of, in quotes, of the school was that anyone could make an announcement after lunch. And so I started this thing where I would summarize what had happened on Beverly Hills 90210 the week before, and then look forward, and I would write little scripts, and my schoolmates and I would sort of act them out. And it was not met with resounding applause, like the faculty was just like, oh, it's her again, like, who cares about this show? But then the more I look back, because I've been thinking about that a lot these days, like that was an act of engagement with something that was really popular at the time. And I think that's where, for me, media studies and cultural studies started to grow in my mind.
I just think of like how much like media is like connective tissue for so many like interactions, and like generationally, like being a 90s kid is predicated on what media you have knowledge of. Yep. And like where were you or how old you are in the context of certain things. And I'm like, I think that that's so interesting. And then like the idea of like throwing that to the wayside is, it's like, oh, that's just pop culture, that's not important. And I'm like, hello, people are building their whole identities on, what do you mean? I wanted to be a part of pop culture. I said, like, I wanted to like know, because because it was like, that's how people like connected. And so I remember when I was a child, I looked at a like People magazine or a tabloid, whatever, in the grocery store, and I was like, one day I'm gonna know everyone who's on the cover of this magazine, because I wanted to be that well connected with things. And I remember a moment where I was like, oh, I cannot wait to go talk to other people about this, because I know that they know. And that is when Britney Spears kissed Madonna, and I was like 6. I remember like watching the television and going, oh, I know what this is. I was like, this is one of, and it was on the news, it was everywhere. I saw something talking about it recently, and I was like, yeah, see, the idea that like, and the only reason why it's like allowed to exist in the way that it does is because like the archive and the internet being like this huge archive that like just keeps regenerating. So you almost feel like you're in the original context because you can watch the original footage. And so, like, the conversation is, like, ongoing in perpetuity, where you're just like, oh, my God, I found out that Beyonce did a thing today. And somebody else could be like, I remember what she did that thing. But you both feel like you connected to it on the same level. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like that's very powerful. We should probably look at that.
Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, did you go back and watch the first season of The Real World?
I didn't watch all of it, but I did watch some clips. I liked watching the super old ones because it's so mundane and almost boring.
I actually love it. I feel like the first season especially, it was bridging the gap between documentary and then what became reality TV. Like it was, you see the trajectory like as the episodes go.
I just want to know, like, what that thought process was like for that producer executive, where they're like, because the thing about Real World, okay, especially thinking about MTV at the time. So this comes out in what, 2000?
No, the first season of the.
Oh, like, no, wait, 1990 something, right?
It was 1990 or 91, yeah.
Yeah, 1990. Okay, so even better. So in 1990, you think of like MTV and like what they're known for. That's like, yeah, it's music television. It's music videos, tour documentaries, concerts. Reality television doesn't exist. It's just straight up all commercialization, all product, all marketing, all the time. And then you're like, what if we got 7 non-famous people to just go live with each other in a regular place because, like, they didn't have budget? And I was just like, first of all, what was the pitch like for this and how did this work? And then two, once it started being watched, and it wasn't like, oh, a few people casually watched this. No, it was a television event. People were like straight up like, what the I went to go look up the ratings numbers, and this in 1990 was pulling, for the demographic, was pulling numbers. And you see the, like, mind shift, because the person who is running this is like, oh, wait, hold on. People will watch this, so we have to keep them watching this. And then all of a sudden, it's like Real World as you know it. Like, it's like such a distinct click. And, like, I love the old episodes because, like, you see these people, they're so shy and abashed and, like, so polite and so awkward because they're on camera. Now, literally look at any reality television. People are, like, or just not even. Look at, like, social media. Well, like TikTok or YouTube, that basically proliferates this dream of you can also be a reality star of your own life.
Yep, exactly.
I think the thing that is, like, so wild to me, and the thing that I want to see addressed, is the idea of when they knew it was going to be profitable to exploit people via alcohol. Because on every show, that is a common factor, is like, these people are inebriated, and then all hell breaks loose. And I'm like, and I think the love shows are a little bit, love competition shows, I'm tossing aside, but, like, these love shows where it's just, like, you and another person are different, because, like, it's, like, will they or won't they type drama, but this idea that, like, when we get groups of people together, they're, like, the producers are, like, I know, in order to create conflict, we're going to exacerbate their mental issues and then give them copious amounts of alcohol, and I'm just like, okay, who came up with that? Because they should be tried.
I recently watched, so 90 Day Fiancé, famous, well-known, they have a quarantine season, and the sort of pitch in the opening credits is no producers, no, like, nobody's there, so they filmed themselves, which is not true because it's highly produced and that's reality television. But they're using their own cameras. They are seizing the means, but they're not. And it was a very different vibe, and it was really wonderful to watch because you actually see, yes, there's conflict, but there's so much humor going on between these family members, and, like, they're just, it's the opposite of what we sometimes think reality TV is now, where it's just like everyone is trying to kill each other, and now they're like, no, we're all suffering because of COVID, and we're just trying to love each other and try to get through. And it was brilliant. And I think I'm going to write about it. Like, I think it was a direction that reality TV could go in if they weren't as obsessed with capital and profit.
The first year after COVID, I don't want to go anywhere. It's going to be a mess. But I also want to do everything and go everywhere because, like, I want to see that collective grieving process and that collective joy and, like, how we decide to, like what our media looks like, because I think it's going to be, like, in terms of impact, I genuinely think it's going to be, like, almost a reversal in terms of, like, post 9/11 stuff, because, like, how that I feel like, because, like, we're not going to be able to depict these 2 years, because, like, I don't think anybody wants to see that. I don't think it'll be profitable, but, like, you can't not allude to it if you're going to show everybody losing their minds. And I think there's going to be so much more, like, media around, like, hedonistic things. Like, I just genuinely believe that because everyone is so focused on that. Or like music. I watched a really interesting video essay on post 9/11 music, and everyone talks about 2004, and I always said the 90s ended in 2004. Because like that, and like the way that we talk, even in like that dialect is gone because of 9/11. And so I'm like, I cannot wait to see what that looks like when you have Gen Zers finally allowed that means of escapism, nostalgia culture pushing hard because you've had like so much time to just like sit in it, and then just the general joy that people are going to feel just to be outside the house. And like, but then also very much 1930s because it's very much economic.
What a joy. Thank you so much for doing this.
I'll do it again. We can do it every week if you want. We'll just get on here and feel like, what did you want to talk about for 2 hours today?
Awesome.